Have you ever wondered about the dark side of Tartarian schools? How education turned into a system of obedience? Because some of these old schools don't feel like schools at all. They look like palaces, giant stone stairs, towers, domes, long halls that echo like a church. And then you find the first crack in the story, a basement window that is now underground, a sealed staircase that goes nowhere, a hallway that ends in a bricked-up door. Then comes the second crack. A restorer opens a forgotten crate from an exhibition hall. The label says, "Acoustic ornaments, do not strike." Inside are broken bronze pieces with stamped numbers, and a strange mark, like two circles overlapping. He taps one lightly, and the metal answers with a low hum, 112 hertz, so deep it makes the glass cases tremble. Now the third crack. An old photo shows a bell hanging above something that looks like an electrical generator. But in later prints, the bell is painted out like someone tried to erase it from history. So here's the question that should scare you. If these buildings were only meant to teach reading and math, why do they look like machines? And why were parts of them hidden, buried, and cleaned from the record? Were Tartarian schools really built for learning? Or were they built to teach one lesson first? Obey? So, let's start where every real investigation starts. With a photograph, not a rumor, not a legend. A classroom photo from 1891, Philadelphia. The Central Manual Training School. The image shows a massive hall, tall arched windows, rows of wooden desks stretching toward the back like pews in a cathedral. The ceiling climbs far higher than any normal classroom would ever need, and above the students, hanging from an iron beam, there is a bell. But not a normal school bell. This bell sits directly over something that looks like an early electrical generator, copper coils, metal housings, and wires that run into the walls and disappear. The original print is labeled in faded ink, Acoustic Demonstration Chamber, Senior Hall, West Wing, not classroom, not lecture room, Demonstration Chamber. The photograph was published twice, once in 1891, inside a small engineering journal that folded within a year, and again in 1923, in a commemorative booklet celebrating the school's 50th anniversary. But the two images are not the same. In the 1923 version, the bell is gone, the generator is gone, the iron beam remains, but the space above it has been painted in, flat gray, like the ceiling was always empty. The caption changes too. It now reads, Main Lecture Hall. Original construction. No mention of acoustic chambers. No mention of demonstrations. Just a classroom. A researcher named Harold Whitman noticed the discrepancy in 1987. He wrote to the Philadelphia Historical Commission and asked for access to the original negatives. His letter, still preserved in the commission's correspondence files, contains one sentence that never received a real answer. If the 1891 apparatus was merely decorative, why was it removed from the visual record rather than simply explained? The commission replied that the original negatives had been lost in a storage fire. Date of fire, 1956. And here's the part that makes people pause. No other records from that storage facility were reported as damaged. Whitman's notes, donated to a private archive after his death, include a sketch. He copied the bell's shape by hand. Beneath it, he wrote a single measurement, 112 hertz. How he got that number is unclear. His papers don't mention tests, tools, or instruments. And yet, that same frequency appears in other places that have nothing to do with Whitman. Exhibition catalogs, acoustic patents, even a shipment manifest for bronze components sent to 3 different schools in 1888. 112 hertz, low enough to feel in your chest, low enough to make objects tremble without being touched. The photograph still exists today in a private collection in Boston. The owner, who purchased it at an estate sale in 2011, says the glass plate has a faint residue along one edge. A chemical signature suggesting the area above the students' heads was treated with a solvent. In other words, someone may have tried to erase the bell before the image was even printed, but the emulsion held the shadow, and shadows, it turns out, don't cooperate the way objects do. This is the point where most people would stop and shrug. A curiosity, a printing mistake, a caption someone cleaned up for a fancy anniversary booklet. But the Central Manual Training School is not alone. There are others, in Chicago, in London, in Berlin, different architects, different decades, different languages. And yet, the blueprints share something that doesn't feel like coincidence. The crate arrived at the Smithsonian Restoration Wing in the autumn of 2003. It had been sitting in a warehouse in Baltimore for decades. No one could say exactly how long. The shipping label was too faded to read, but a custom stamp suggested it had crossed the Atlantic sometime before 1914. The manifest listed the contents with cold simplicity: acoustic ornaments, pavilion collection, handle with care, and beneath that, written in red ink that had barely survived the years, "Do not strike. Washington, D.C. October 2003. A conservator named Elena Ruiz was assigned to catalog the crate's contents. She expected decorative moldings, maybe brass fittings from an old exhibition hall, the kind of forgotten inventory that ends up in museum basements and stays there. What she found was different. Inside the crate, wrapped in oil canvas and straw, lay 17 bronze fragments. Each piece was curved, thick, heavy for its size. The largest fragment weighed nearly 40 pounds. The smallest could fit in a palm. Every piece bore the same markings: a stamped number, a foundry symbol she didn't recognize, and a strange design pressed into the metal, two circles overlapping, like a figure 8 turned on its side, or like two frequencies crossing. Ruiz documented the fragments with photographs and measurements. She noted the bronze had an unusual color, darker than typical alloys, almost copper black in certain light. The surface was smooth in some places, pitted in others, as if the metal had lived through intense heat or years of vibration. One fragment had a thin crack running along its inner curve. She touched it, and the metal answered. The hum was low, so low she felt it before she fully heard it. A deep vibration traveled through her fingertips, up her arm, and settled somewhere behind her sternum. The glass display cases nearby began to tremble. A pencil rolled off her workbench. The overhead lights flickered once, then steadied. Ruiz stepped back. The fragment kept resonating for nearly 4 seconds after she released it. That afternoon, she measured the tone using a borrowed spectrometer. 112 hertz, the same number Harold Whitman wrote beneath his sketch of the Philadelphia Bell. The same frequency that appears in acoustic patents from the 1880s. The same tone that, according to certain studies, sits just below the edge of human hearing, yet still lands in the body, in the chest, in the bones, in the teeth. A frequency that doesn't teach, a frequency that directs. Ruiz filed her report with the Smithsonian's Collections Department. She requested additional analysis. She asked for the crate's full provenance. She wanted to know which pavilion these fragments came from, and why they had been stored for so long without serious examination. Her request was denied. The official response stated the fragments were decorative elements of no scientific significance and recommended they be returned to storage pending future review. The crate was sealed again in January 2004. It has not been opened since, but Ruiz kept her notes. She kept the spectrometer readings, she kept the photographs, and she kept one detail that never appeared in her official report, something she only mentioned years later in a personal letter to a colleague. The letter reads, "When I held the largest fragment, I felt something I cannot explain. Not just the vibration, something else, a kind of stillness, as if the room had gone quiet in a way that had nothing to do with sound." She never explained what she meant, but her colleague, a retired acoustics professor, wrote back with a single question. "Did you check the other fragments? Did they all resonate at the same frequency?" Ruiz never replied. The crate in Baltimore, the photograph in Philadelphia, the sketches in Whitman's Moore archive, each piece pulls toward the same conclusion. These buildings were not designed for silence. They were designed for sound, a specific sound, a measured sound, a sound that someone, at some point, decided should be filed away and forgotten. The discovery began with a mistake. In 2016, an architecture student in Munich was digitizing old municipal records for her thesis. She was hunting for Art Nouveau influences in Bavarian school design. Instead, she found something that shouldn't exist. A blueprint dated 1887, a public school in the Schwabing district, and a floor plan that matched almost exactly a school built 3 years earlier in Manchester, England. Not similar, not inspired by. Identical. Munich. Manchester. And then one more. The student, whose name appears in no published record, expanded her search. She cross-checked architectural archives in London, Berlin, Vienna, and Philadelphia. Within 6 months, she had identified 11 schools across 3 continents that shared the same structural skeleton, same proportions, same ceiling heights, same placement of towers, domes, and basement chambers. Different architects, different decades, different languages carved into cornerstones. And yet, the bones were the same. At first glance, you could try to shrug it off. Copying a facade is normal. Architects borrow. Trends travel. A successful design in one city gets echoed in another. But these blueprints didn't just share style. They shared features you would never see from the street. Hidden features. Each school contained a central tower with an interior shaft running from basement to roof. The shafts were not labeled as chimneys. They were not labeled as ventilation. In most blueprints, they carried no label at all, just a clean vertical line passing through every floor, linking spaces that had no obvious reason to be connected. Each school contained a basement, with walls twice as thick as the floors above. The basements were divided into small chambers with heavy doors. Some chambers were marked with copper plating on the walls. Others had drains in the floor that led to no sewer line. Each school contained a dome, sometimes visible, sometimes hidden beneath a false roof, lined with metal panels arranged in a precise geometric pattern. The patterns varied, but the angles did not. 36 degrees, 72 degrees, 144 degrees. Numbers that repeat in harmonic structures. Numbers you see in acoustic design, in resonance chambers, in spaces built to boost specific frequencies instead of swallowing them. The Munich student compiled her findings into a private document. She shared it with her thesis advisor in early 2017. The advisor suggested she focus on a different topic. When she pressed for an explanation, he replied only that the material was too speculative for academic submission. She changed her thesis. She graduated, and she never published the research. But the document survived. Copies started circulating among independent researchers. Fragments appeared on obscure forums. Someone uploaded a partial version to an archive in 2019, where it remained for 11 days before being removed. No explanation, just gone. The schools themselves still stand. The one in Munich is now an administrative building. The tower was shortened in 1954. The dome was removed entirely during renovations in 1971. The one in Manchester operates as a community center. The basement chambers were converted into storage. The copper plating was stripped decades ago, sold, according to one account, to a scrap dealer who left no receipt. And the one in Philadelphia, the same Central Manual Training School from the photograph, was demolished in 1962. The official reason was structural damage. Yet photographs from 1960 show the building in excellent condition, and the demolition records list no salvage inventory, no auction, no transfer of materials. The building didn't just come down, it vanished. 3 cities, 3 schools, 3 sets of records that contradict themselves. Coincidence can explain similarity. Coincidence does not explain precision. It does not explain why architects who never met drew the same hidden shafts. It does not explain why builders on different continents poured the same reinforced basements. It does not explain why, again and again, renovations worked to erase the very features that made these buildings unusual. Something connected these schools, a system, a network, a purpose that never made it into the public record. And if the blueprints above ground raise questions, the spaces below ground raise even more. In 1998, a maintenance crew in Cleveland was called to repair a water leak in the basement of a decommissioned elementary school. The building had been closed for 6 years. The city planned to convert it into low-income housing. The leak was routine. The discovery was not. Behind a false wall in the boiler room, they found a staircase. It descended 12 feet into darkness, and it led to a door that had been bricked shut from the inside. Cleveland, 1998. The foreman, a man named Gerald Sims, filed a report with the city's building department. He described the staircase as original to the structure, the same stone, the same mortar, the same craftsmanship as the rest of the basement. Not an add-on, not a later remodel. The staircase was built with the school, and then it was sealed. The brickwork blocking the door showed no signs of impact, no cracks, no messy repair work. Whoever closed that passage did it carefully, deliberately, like they expected no one to ever open it again. Sims requested permission to break through. His request was denied. The official response said the area was structurally unstable and recommended the staircase be filled with concrete. It was filled within 1 week, and just like that, the staircase stopped existing. The Cleveland School is not unique. Across the United States and Europe, renovation crews have reported the same kind of finds: half floors that appear on no blueprint, sealed corridors that connect buildings underground, rooms with no doors, accessible only through shafts in the ceiling. And then there are the windows that are now below ground. Chicago, 1987. A photographer documenting historic schools noticed something strange about the Pullman Free School of Manual Training. On the exterior, there was a row of arched windows that looked like they belonged to a first floor, but inside, that level was a basement. Those windows stared straight into packed earth. He checked the construction records. The school was built in 1884. The original plans showed those windows at street level. Somewhere between then and now, the ground had risen by nearly 8 feet. Or the building had sunk. Or, and this is the possibility no official document wants to touch, the lower floors were buried on purpose. The photographer, whose work appeared briefly in a regional architecture journal, noted one more detail. The windows were not bricked up. They were not filled with concrete. They were simply covered, from the outside, with metal panels bolted directly into the stone, meaning someone sealed those windows while they were still above ground. Someone prepared them to be buried, and this pattern keeps repeating. In London, the Whitechapel Foundation School shows signs of at least 2 floors below the current basement level. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in 2012 revealed cavities consistent with large chambers. The surveys were never published. The researcher who ran them left the university the following year. In Berlin, the former Königstädtisches Gymnasium contains a sub-basement with walls lined in slate and copper. Renovation workers in 1979 reported finding iron rails embedded in the floor, rails that matched no known industrial equipment in the building's records. The room was converted to storage. The rails were removed. No photographs remain. In Philadelphia, demolition records from 1962 mention lower infrastructure requiring special handling. No drawings attached, no explanation. No contractor has ever confirmed what special handling actually meant. These are not normal cellars. Cellars store coal. Cellars hide pipes, boilers, and maintenance access. Cellars are built for function, not for secrecy. But these spaces were built to be hidden. And when they could no longer be hidden, they were erased, filled with concrete, stripped of copper, renamed as storage, deleted from blueprints that somehow survived every other revision. So, the question is no longer whether these rooms existed. The question is what they were for, and why every institution, every city office, every archive, every renovation committee has worked so hard to make sure no one remembers. For years, researchers focused on the bells, the bronze fragments, the 112 Hz frequency, the photographs showing bells suspended above strange machinery. It seemed like the answer, a hidden acoustic system, a technology lost or suppressed. But the bells were never the point. They were only one component, one voice in a much larger instrument. Boston, 2019. An independent researcher named Catherine Aldrich published a paper on architectural acoustics in pre-modern educational buildings. The paper received little attention. It was dense, technical, filled with measurements and diagrams. But buried in the appendix was a discovery that changed everything. Aldrich had analyzed the structural elements of 11 schools built between 1876 and 1903. She measured ceiling heights, wall thicknesses, corridor lengths, and the placement of every vent, shaft, and opening. The results were impossible to ignore. Each building functioned as a resonance chamber, not by accident, by design. The principle is simple. Sound travels in waves. When a wave encounters a surface, it reflects. If the surface is the right shape and the right distance from the source, the reflections amplify. The sound grows stronger. This is how concert halls work, how cathedrals create that sense of vastness and awe, how a whisper in one corner can be heard clearly in another. But these schools were not designed for music. They were designed for control. Aldrich's measurements revealed a system of interlocking frequencies. The bell towers produced a low tone, around 112 hertz. This tone traveled down the central shafts, into the basements, and up through the floors. The copper domes amplified certain harmonics while dampening others. The long corridors acted as waveguides, directing sound into specific rooms. The vents were not for air, they were for resonance. Every classroom, every hallway, every stairwell was tuned to receive the same signal, a signal too low to hear consciously, a signal that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the body, to the nervous system, to the parts of the brain that respond before thinking begins. Aldrich called it architectural conditioning. The building itself was a machine for shaping behavior, not through lessons, not through discipline, through vibration. A student sitting in those rooms would feel calm without knowing why, compliant without choosing to be. The body would settle, the mind would follow. Obedience would feel natural because the architecture made it so. Her paper was rejected by 3 journals before finding a home in a small acoustics publication. Within a year, it was removed from the publication's online archive. Aldrich received no explanation. Her emails went unanswered. When she attempted to present her findings at a conference in 2021, her panel was canceled due to scheduling conflicts. She has not published since. The bells were one voice. The domes were another. The basements, with their thick walls and copper plating, were isolation chambers, spaces where the frequency could be generated without interference, then distributed through the building like blood through veins. The towers were transmitters, the corridors were channels, the classrooms were receivers, and the students, row after row, year after year, were the subjects of an experiment that never appeared in any curriculum. This is the shift, the moment the story changes. Because if Aldrich was right, then these buildings were never schools in the way we understand the word. They were instruments. Instruments for teaching one lesson before any teacher opened their mouth. Sit still. Stay quiet. Do not question. Obey. The architecture shaped the body, but architecture does not build itself. Behind every blueprint, there is an intention. Behind every intention, there is a need. And in the late 19th century, the need was clear. Industry was rising, factories were hungry, and the old ways of learning, slow, personal, rooted in family and craft, could not produce workers fast enough. So, the system changed, and learning began to look like something else entirely. Boston, 1852. The Massachusetts Board of Education published a report that would reshape schools across the nation. The author was Horace Mann, often called the father of American public education. His words were passionate, idealistic, filled with promises of opportunity and equality. But beneath the rhetoric was a blueprint for obedience. Mann had toured Prussian schools in 1843. He admired their efficiency, their order, their ability to process thousands of children through a standardized system that produced predictable results. The Prussian model was not designed for creativity. It was not designed for independent thought. It was designed for a nation that needed soldiers and bureaucrats, citizens who would follow orders without hesitation. Mann saw potential, not for soldiers, for workers. Within 2 decades, the Prussian model spread across the United States. The changes were systematic. Time was divided into rigid blocks. Bells marked the beginning and end of each period. Students moved from room to room on schedule, like components on an assembly line. Subjects were separated. Mathematics in 1 hour, reading in the next, history after lunch. Knowledge was fragmented, disconnected from life, presented as facts to be memorized rather than skills to be mastered. Silence became a virtue. Speaking without permission was punished. Movement was restricted. The body was trained to sit still for hours, a skill that had no value on a farm or in a workshop, but infinite value in a factory. The parallels are difficult to ignore. A factory floor has stations. A school has classrooms. A factory has shift bells. A school has period bells. A factory has supervisors watching from elevated platforms. A school has teachers standing on raised stages at the front of each room. A factory produces identical products. A school produces identical graduates, trained to arrive on time, follow instructions, and never question the system that shaped them. This was not hidden. The architects of public education wrote openly about their goals. Elwood Cubberley, a Stanford professor and influential educational reformer, declared in 1916 that schools were factories in which the raw products, children, are to be shaped and fashioned into products to meet the various demands of life. He used the word products, not citizens, not thinkers, not individuals, products. The bell was essential, not for timekeeping. Clocks could do that. The bell was essential because it trained the nervous system. When the bell rang, the body responded, automatically, without thought. Stand up, sit down, move, stop. The bell created reflexes that would serve the factory floor, the military barracks, the corporate office. Reflexes that would last a lifetime. And the architecture reinforced the lesson. Long corridors taught movement in lines. High ceilings created a sense of smallness, of insignificance. Hard surfaces reflected sound, making every footstep audible, every whisper detectable. The building watched, the building listened, the building taught, before any lesson began, that you were never alone, never unwatched, never free to act without consequence. This was not education. This was conditioning. And the children who passed through these halls emerged changed, not smarter, not wiser, not more capable of independent thought, trained to respond to bells, trained to sit in rows, trained to ask permission before speaking, before moving, before thinking, trained to obey. The schedule trained the mind to fragment. The bell trained the nervous system to respond. But the building, the walls, the windows, the ceilings, the floors, trained something deeper, the body itself. Stand in an old school hallway, not a modern one with dropped ceilings and fluorescent lights. An old one, 1900, 1890, 1880. Notice the height first. The ceiling rises 12, 15, sometimes 20 feet above your head, far higher than function requires. Notice the width. The corridor stretches long and narrow, like a channel designed to move water in one direction. Notice the floor, hard, stone or tile. Every footstep echoes, now walk, and feel how small you become. This was not accident. Architectural journals from the late 19th century discussed school design with remarkable candor. An 1893 article in The American Architect recommends ceilings of sufficient height to inspire appropriate humility in the student body. Humility, not comfort, not health, not optimal learning conditions. Humility. The teacher's platform tells the same story. In nearly every classroom built before 1950, the teacher stood on a raised stage, sometimes 6 inches, sometimes a full foot above the students. The elevation served no acoustic purpose. The rooms were designed to carry sound regardless of where the speaker stood. The elevation served a psychological purpose. The teacher was above, the students were below. The hierarchy was literal, physical, reinforced every moment of every day. A child sitting in those rows learned the lesson without words. Authority is higher. You are lower. Look up to obey. The windows were equally deliberate. Old school windows are tall, narrow, placed high on the wall. A student sitting at a desk could see sky, perhaps a tree branch, perhaps nothing but light. But a student could not see out, could not see the street, could not see freedom, could not be distracted by the world beyond the walls. The light entered, the gaze did not leave. London, 1908. The British Board of Education published guidelines for school construction that specified exact window placements. The bottom of each window was to be no less than 4 feet above floor level to prevent visual distraction and mental wandering. Mental wandering. The phrase appears repeatedly in educational documents of the era. It was treated as a disease, a failure of discipline, a threat to the system, and the architecture was designed to cure it. Then there was the air. Old schools featured elaborate ventilation systems, shafts running through walls, vents near the ceiling, grills in the floor. The official purpose was health. Fresh air prevents disease. Proper circulation maintains alertness. But the systems did more than move air. They moved sound. A whisper in one classroom could travel through the ducts to another. A teacher's voice could carry from the hallway into every room on a floor. The building breathed, and the building listened. Some schools went further. Architectural plans from Cleveland, Chicago, and Philadelphia show classrooms with angled walls, walls that do not meet at 90 degrees. The angles were subtle, 2 or 3 degrees off perpendicular, invisible to the casual eye, but acoustically, they transformed the room. Parallel walls create echoes. Angled walls direct sound. In these classrooms, every word spoken by the teacher traveled directly to the students. Every word spoken by a student traveled directly to the teacher. There were no acoustic shadows, no corners where a whisper could hide. The room was designed for total auditory surveillance. The body learned, not through instruction, through experience. Sit straight. The hard bench offers no comfort for slouching. Stay still. Every movement echoes on the wooden floor. Speak only when spoken to. The room carries your voice to authority, whether you intend it or not. The architecture taught posture, stillness, silence. The architecture taught obedience. The classroom taught stillness. The corridor taught movement in lines. But there was another space, a larger space, a space where the lessons became physical in ways that had nothing to do with education, the gymnasium, or as the original blueprints often called it, the drill hall. Look at old school gymnasiums, not the modern ones with basketball hoops and rubber floors. The old ones, 1880, 1890, 1900. The ceilings rise 40, 50, sometimes 60 feet. The floors are hardwood, polished smooth, designed to echo every footstep. The windows sit high on the walls, too high to see out, but perfect for flooding the space with cold, even light. These rooms were not built for games. They were built for formations. Philadelphia, 1891. A photograph from the Central Manual Training School shows 300 boys standing in the gymnasium. They are arranged in perfect rows, perfect columns, arms at their sides, eyes forward. The spacing between each boy is identical, exactly 3 feet in every direction. They are not playing, they are not exercising, they are standing at attention. The caption beneath the photograph reads, Physical Culture Demonstration, Senior Division. Physical culture. The term appears in school records throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It sounds healthy, progressive, modern, but the photographs tell a different story. Row after row of children performing synchronized movements, arms raised in unison, bodies bending at the same angle, feet stepping at the same moment, not exercise, drill. The connection to military training was not hidden. In 1889, the Boston School Committee published a report recommending systematic physical training modeled on Prussian military gymnastics for all public school students. The report cited efficiency, health, discipline. It also cited something else. The habits of prompt obedience and simultaneous action acquired in the drill hall will prove invaluable in later life, whether in the factory, the office, or the field of battle. Factory, office, battle. 3 destinations, 1 training method. The drill hall was a rehearsal space, not for plays, for life. Children practice moving as a unit. They practice responding to commands without hesitation. They practice suppressing individual impulse in favor of collective action. The whistle blew. They moved. The whistle blew again. They stopped. The body learned. The mind followed. London, 1903. The British Army published a manual titled Physical Training for Schools. The manual was not optional. It was adopted by school boards across England, Scotland, and Wales. It specified exact exercises, exact formations, exact commands. Page 47 contains a diagram showing students arranged in a grid pattern. The caption reads, Formation for Rapid Deployment. Deployment, the word belongs on a battlefield. It appeared in a children's textbook. Some schools went further. Records from Chicago show that certain institutions held weekly inspection drills where students stood at attention while administrators walked between the rows, checking posture, checking uniform compliance, checking for any sign of deviation. Students who failed inspection faced punishment, not for academic failure, for physical failure, for holding their shoulders at the wrong angle, for spacing their feet incorrectly, for breathing too loudly. The body was not just trained, the body was inspected, the body was judged. and the architecture supported every moment. The high ceilings allowed sound to travel. A single command could reach every corner of the hall. The hard floors amplified footsteps, making any break in synchronization immediately audible. The tall windows provided light without distraction, without escape. The drill hall was a machine for producing uniformity, and the children who passed through it emerged different, not stronger, not healthier, not more capable of independent thought. Synchronized, ready to march, ready to work, ready to follow. The system worked. For decades, the schools trained bodies and minds with remarkable efficiency. The architecture, the schedules, the drill halls, all functioned as designed. But somewhere along the way, someone decided the evidence should disappear. Not the schools themselves. The schools remained. The records, the blueprints, the photographs that showed too clearly what these buildings were meant to do. Those began to vanish. Baltimore, 1947. A fire broke out in the basement of the Maryland State Archives. The official report called it an electrical fault. Faulty wiring in an old building. An unfortunate accident. The damage was limited to one section of the basement. That section contained municipal records from 1870 to 1910. School construction permits, architectural plans, contractor invoices, inspection reports. All destroyed. No other records were touched. This pattern repeats. In Cleveland, a warehouse fire in 1953 destroyed school board records from the same era. In Chicago, a flood in 1961 damaged basement storage containing original blueprints for 17 public schools. In Philadelphia, records were simply reported as lost during administrative reorganization in 1958. No fire, no flood, just lost. Decades of documentation, exposed to heat, consumed by water, misplaced during shuffling of papers, always the same years, always the same types of records, always the schools built between 1870 and 1910. The physical evidence followed. Local newspapers from the 1950s and 60s contained scattered reports of school renovations. Towers shortened, domes removed, basements sealed. A 1954 article in the Cleveland Plain Dealer mentions that the Lincoln Elementary School tower was reduced by 22 feet due to structural concerns. No engineering report supported the claim. A 1959 article in the Chicago Tribune notes that copper roofing was stripped from 3 schools and sold for scrap to offset renovation costs. No accounting records show where the money went. A 1963 article in the Philadelphia Inquirer reports that bells from 4 schools were recast for modern use. Recast, the bronze was melted, reformed. The original frequencies, whatever they were, destroyed forever. Some losses were more subtle. Architectural drawings were revised. New versions appeared in archives with dates that matched the originals, but content that did not. A researcher in Boston discovered this in 2008. She was comparing blueprints of the Quincy Grammar School. One version came from a private collection. The other came from the Massachusetts State Archives. Both carried the same date, 1874. But the private version showed basement chambers that did not appear in the state version. It showed ventilation shafts running to the tower. It showed a room labeled only as resonance. The state version showed none of this. Someone had redrawn the plans, carefully, precisely, removing every unusual feature while preserving every ordinary one. The forgery was nearly perfect. Nearly. Why? Why go to such lengths to erase evidence of school construction? If these buildings were only schools, ordinary schools teaching ordinary lessons, why would anyone care what the original blueprints showed? Why burn records? Why strip copper? Why shorten towers and seal basements and redraw architectural plans? The effort required was enormous. The coordination across cities, across decades, across institutions, that does not happen by accident. Someone wanted these details forgotten. Someone with resources, someone with access, someone with the authority to reach into archives and remove pages, to order renovations without explanation, to silence questions before they were asked. Every time researchers approach the truth, the trail breaks. A document is missing. A building has been renovated. A witness cannot be found. The past did not simply fade. It was edited, carefully, systematically, by hands that never signed their names. The records were burned, the blueprints were redrawn, the towers were shortened, and the basement sealed. But erasure is imperfect work. Details survive in unexpected places. A photograph in a private collection, a diary entry in an attic, a shipping manifest that was filed in the wrong folder and forgotten for a century. And when these fragments are assembled, they reveal something that should not be possible. The dates do not match. Pittsburgh, 2014. A construction crew was demolishing an old school to make way for a parking structure. The building had been closed since 1987. The record said it was built in 1902. During demolition, a worker discovered a cornerstone. Not the cornerstone visible from the street. That one read 1902, as expected. A second cornerstone, hidden behind a later addition, buried in a wall that had been built around it. The date carved into the stone was 1847, 55 years earlier than the official record. The discovery was reported to the city's historical commission. Their response came within a week. The cornerstone was likely salvaged from an earlier structure and reused for symbolic purposes. Case closed. But the explanation raised more questions than it answered. The stone was not damaged, not weathered differently than the surrounding masonry, not installed as decoration. It was load-bearing, structural, part of the foundation itself. The building had not reused an old stone. The building was old, older than any record admitted. This is not an isolated case. In 1891, an inventory was conducted of school properties in Boston. The document lists construction dates, materials, and costs for every public school in the city. One entry stands out. The Adams School is listed as constructed 1888. The construction cost is recorded as $42,000, but a separate document, a contractor's invoice from 1887, lists materials delivered to the Adams School site. Granite blocks, iron beams, copper sheeting. The total weight of materials delivered exceeds what a $42,000 budget could purchase by a factor of 3. Either the prices were wrong, or the budget was a fiction, or the materials came from somewhere else, somewhere the records do not mention. The contradictions multiply. School inventories list furniture, equipment, and fixtures with precise weights and measurements, but they list no origins, no manufacturers, no shipping records. Desks weighing 300 pounds each, chalkboards framed in bronze, bell mechanisms with components that match no known foundry marks. Where did these objects come from? Who made them? The documents do not say. Chicago, 1906. An audit of school board finances revealed an irregularity. Funds allocated for equipment maintenance exceeded the total value of equipment listed in school inventories. The board spent more maintaining objects than the objects were worth, unless the inventories were incomplete, unless there were objects, systems, mechanisms, installations that appeared on no official list. The auditor who discovered the discrepancy requested clarification. His request was denied. He submitted a formal complaint. The complaint was filed, acknowledged, never investigated. He resigned 6 months later. His notes have never been found. What do these contradictions mean? Either the timelines are wrong, and buildings existed decades before their official construction dates, or the budgets are wrong, and schools receive materials and equipment that cost far more than any educational institution could justify. Or the labels are wrong, and these buildings were never schools at all. They were something else, built for another purpose, repurposed, renamed, given histories that fit the narrative, histories that are now collapsing under the weight of their own inconsistencies. The question is no longer what these buildings taught. The question is what they were, and the answer, if it exists, lies buried beneath layers of concrete, hidden behind false walls, locked in archives that burn at convenient moments. The old systems were dismantled, the towers shortened, the domes removed, the copper stripped and sold, the basement sealed with concrete. Officials called it modernization, progress, necessary upgrades for a new era. But something changed when the renovations were complete, something that no budget report could measure, something that the people inside those buildings felt, even if they could not name it. Detroit, 1973. A teacher named Margaret Holloway had worked at the Franklin Elementary School for 22 years. She had taught in the same classroom, under the same high ceilings, beside the same tall windows since 1951. In the summer of 1972, the school was renovated. Dropped ceilings were installed. The original plaster was covered with acoustic tiles. The windows were replaced with smaller, energy-efficient units. The ventilation system was modernized, the old shafts sealed, new ducts installed. The bell tower was deemed structurally unsound. It was removed entirely. When Holloway returned in September, she noticed something immediately. The room felt different. Her letters to a colleague described the change. "The children are restless in a way I have never seen. They cannot sit still. They cannot focus. It is as if something that used to hold them has let go." She attributed it to the new fluorescent lights. The hum they produced, the flicker that was almost invisible but somehow present. But the lights were not the only change. "There is a deadness now. The room used to breathe. I know that sounds strange, but it did. Now it just sits there, like a box." Holloway retired in 1975. Her letters were donated to a local historical society after her death in 1994. No one has studied them. Her experience was not unique. Across the country, teachers reported similar observations after school renovations in the 1960s and 70s. Students became more anxious, more disruptive, less able to concentrate. Disciplinary incidents increased. Attention spans decreased. The calm that had once settled over classrooms, without explanation, without effort, was gone. Administrators blamed television, blamed changing family structures, blamed sugar and additives and the chaos of modern life. No one blamed the buildings. Cleveland, 1978. A school psychologist named David Renner conducted an informal study. He compared behavioral records from 12 schools, 6 that had been renovated, 6 that had not. The renovated schools showed a 43% increase in disciplinary referrals over a 5-year period. The unrenovated schools showed no significant change. Renner submitted his findings to the school board. The response was brief. His methodology was questioned. His sample size was deemed too small. His conclusions were called speculative and unsupported by established research. He was encouraged to focus on other matters. He did. The study was never published. What was lost? The official answer is nothing. The renovations improved safety, reduced heating costs, brought aging infrastructure into compliance with modern codes. But the teachers knew, the students knew, even if they lacked the words. Something in those old buildings had created a feeling, a stillness, a sense of being held by the space itself. Call it atmosphere, call it resonance, call it the accumulated effect of architecture designed to shape the nervous system. Whatever it was, the renovations killed it. The new ceilings blocked the height that once inspired humility. The new windows blocked the light that once flooded without distraction. The sealed vents stopped the air and whatever else moved through those shafts. The removed towers silenced frequencies that had hummed below the threshold of hearing for nearly a century. The buildings still stood, but they were no longer the same. They had become boxes, containers, spaces that held bodies but no longer shaped them. One building is an anomaly. 2 buildings are a coincidence. 11 buildings, across 3 continents, spanning 4 decades, sharing identical hidden features, are a pattern, and patterns demand explanation. The evidence has accumulated throughout this investigation. Bell towers with interior shafts, copper domes with geometric panels, basements with walls too thick for their purpose, classrooms angled to direct sound, ventilation systems that carried more than air. Each feature appeared in multiple schools. Each school appeared in multiple cities. Each city appeared in multiple countries. The question is no longer whether these features existed. The question is whether they were connected. 2 possibilities present themselves. The first is conventional, comfortable, easy to accept. Architectural trends spread. Successful designs are copied. Engineers share ideas across borders. What appears to be coordination is simply parallel evolution, different architects arriving at similar solutions for similar problems. The dome provides natural ventilation. The tower creates a visual landmark. The thick basement walls support heavy floors above. The copper sheeting resists weather. Function explains form. Coincidence explains repetition. Nothing unusual, nothing hidden, nothing to investigate. The second possibility is less comfortable. It begins with a simple observation. These features were not visible. They were not celebrated in architectural journals. They were not listed in promotional materials or pointed out during school dedications. They were hidden. Hidden behind false walls, hidden beneath false floors, hidden in basements that were sealed within decades of construction. If these features served ordinary purposes, why conceal them? If they represented successful engineering, why not replicate them openly? Why build the same hidden system in Philadelphia, Chicago, London, Berlin, and Munich, and never acknowledge the connection? A network, not of wires, not of roads, something else. Consider what the evidence suggests. Schools built to resonate at specific frequencies. Bell towers designed to generate tones below the threshold of hearing. Copper domes arranged to amplify certain harmonics. Ventilation shafts connecting every room to a central source. Each building was an instrument. But instruments can be tuned. Instruments can be synchronized. Instruments can be played together. There is no proof of coordination, no document that says connect the schools, no blueprint-marked network node, no correspondence between architects discussing a shared system. The evidence that would prove connection is precisely the evidence that was destroyed. The fires, the floods, the lost records, the redrawn blueprints. Someone removed the proof, which raises its own question. If there was nothing to hide, why hide it so thoroughly? Map the schools that share these features. Plot them on a chart. Note their construction dates. Note their locations. A pattern emerges. The schools cluster along rail lines, along telegraph routes, along the infrastructure of late 19th century communication and transportation. They were built where connections already existed, as if they were meant to link to something, or to each other. This is speculation. It must be stated clearly. No surviving document proves that these schools formed a network. No living witness can testify to coordinated operation. No physical evidence remains that would confirm signals passed between buildings. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially when the absence was engineered. The conventional explanation requires believing that architects in 5 countries independently designed identical hidden systems for no shared purpose. The network explanation requires believing that someone, some organization, some authority, some interest, built a continental system of acoustic infrastructure disguised as schools. Both possibilities are extraordinary, but only one explains the erasure. Only one explains why towers were shortened and domes removed and basements sealed. Only one explains why records burned in Baltimore and Cleveland and Chicago, always targeting the same years, the same documents, the same secrets. The architecture shaped bodies, the schedules shaped minds, the bells, the drills, the frequencies, all work together toward a single purpose: obedience. But obedience has a price, and that price was paid by children who never understood what was being taken from them. The system worked. By every measurable standard, it worked. Attendance rates climbed, literacy rates improved. Graduation numbers increased decade after decade. The factories received their workers, the offices received their clerks. The military received soldiers who followed orders without hesitation. Success. But success measured only what the system wanted to measure. It did not measure what was lost. Consider the children who did not fit, the ones who could not sit still for 6 hours, the ones who asked too many questions, the ones who looked out windows and dreamed of elsewhere. The system had names for them: troublemakers, slow learners, defectives, and the system had solutions. Philadelphia, 1896. A school inspector's report describes a 13-year-old boy named Thomas Brennan. Thomas was the son of Irish immigrants. His father worked in a textile mill. His mother took in laundry. The report describes Thomas as physically healthy but mentally resistant. He refused to sit in formation during drill exercises. He spoke without raising his hand. He drew pictures in the margins of his arithmetic book. The inspector's recommendation was clear: transfer to industrial training. Academic instruction is wasted on subjects of this temperament. Thomas was removed from regular classes. He was placed in a workshop, where he spent his days assembling wooden crates. He was 13 years old. His academic education was over. Thomas Brennan's story appears in no history book. He was one of thousands, tens of thousands. Children sorted and labeled and redirected based on their failure to conform, not their failure to learn, their failure to obey. The system was especially harsh on certain groups. Immigrant children faced pressure to abandon their languages, their customs, their family traditions. The school taught them that their parents' ways were inferior, that success meant becoming something else. Poor children faced assumptions about their capacity. They were tracked into vocational programs before they had a chance to demonstrate academic ability. The sorting happened early, and the labels lasted forever. Girls faced different constraints. They were trained for domesticity, for service, for supporting roles in a world that reserved ambition for boys. The architecture was the same for everyone, but the lessons varied depending on who you were. And then there were the punishments. Corporal punishment was standard in schools throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Beatings with rulers, strikes with canes, public humiliation for minor infractions. The justification was always discipline, character building, preparation for a harsh world. But the effect was simpler: fear. Children learned to associate deviation with pain. They learned that safety lay in conformity. They learned that their bodies did not belong to them, not fully, not while they were inside those walls. A 1912 study conducted in New York found that over 60% of students reported significant anxiety related to school attendance. 60%. The study recommended reducing class sizes and increasing recess time. The recommendations were ignored. The good students succeeded. They learned to sit still, to speak when spoken to move in lines and respond to bells and suppress every impulse that did not serve the institution. They graduated, they found jobs. They raised families and sent their own children to the same schools. They never questioned the system, because the system had taught them not to question. That was the deepest lesson. Not reading, not arithmetic, not history or science or art. Do not question. Obedience that felt like choice. Conformity that felt like virtue. Silence that felt like wisdom. Before the bells, before the rows of desks, before the standardized schedules and the drill halls and the architecture designed to produce obedience, there was another way, a way that lasted for thousands of years, a way that has been almost erased from memory. Consider how a blacksmith learned his trade in 1820. He did not sit in a classroom. He did not read about metal from a textbook. He did not take examinations. He stood beside a master. He watched. He listened, he tried, he failed, he tried again. The forge was his classroom, the hammer was his teacher, the work itself was the lesson. By the time he finished, after years, not months, he did not merely know about blacksmithing, he was a blacksmith. The knowledge lived in his hands, in his eyes, in his body. No certificate required. This was apprenticeship, the dominant form of education for most of human history. A young person learned by doing, learned from someone who had mastered the craft, learned in context, where every lesson had immediate purpose. The baker's son learned to bake. The carpenter's daughter learned to measure and cut. The merchant's child learned to count and negotiate. Education was not separate from life. Education was life. The system was not perfect. Access depended on family, on geography, on circumstance. Not everyone could find a master. Not everyone could afford the years of unpaid labor that apprenticeship required. But the learning was real. A cabinet maker who completed his apprenticeship could build a cabinet. A midwife who learned from her mentor could deliver a baby. A navigator who trained on ships could cross an ocean. The proof was in the work, not in the grade. There were also smaller schools, one-room schoolhouses where children of different ages learned together, where the older students helped the younger, where the teacher knew every family in the village. The pace was flexible. A child who struggled with reading could take more time. A child who excelled at mathematics could move ahead. There were no bells. The day followed the rhythm of seasons, of harvests, of community needs. Education served the student, not the other way around. What changed? Industry. The factories needed workers who could tolerate monotony, who could follow instructions without understanding, who could perform the same task for 10 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours without complaint. The old education produced craftsmen. independent minds, people who expected their work to have meaning. The new economy did not need craftsmen, it needed hands. So, the schools were redesigned. The apprenticeship model was replaced by the classroom model. The master-student relationship was replaced by the teacher-mass relationship. The integration of learning and doing was replaced by the separation of theory and practice. Children no longer learned by making. They learned by sitting. They learned by listening. They learned by obeying. The old world had its flaws: inequality, limited opportunity, knowledge hoarded by guilds and families, but it also had something the new system destroyed: craft. The pride of making something with your own hands, the dignity of work that carried your name, the connection between effort and outcome. The factory did not want craft. The factory wanted compliance, and the school delivered. We traded apprenticeship for attendance. We traded mastery for memorization. We traded purpose for productivity, and we called it progress. The old ways are not entirely gone. Somewhere, a grandmother still teaches her granddaughter to sew. A father still shows his son how to repair an engine. A chef still trains young cooks by having them work the line, night after night, until the knowledge lives in their hands. These are echoes, fragments of a system that once shaped minds through meaning rather than control. The past cannot be recovered. The bells have been removed, the towers shortened, the basements sealed, the records burned, but the buildings remain. And the buildings still have something to teach, if we know how to look. This is not a call to conspiracy. This is a call to observation, to walking through the world with open eyes, to noticing what has been hidden in plain sight, to asking questions that the official record does not answer. The old schools are still there, in your city, in your town, perhaps on your street, and they are waiting to be seen. Go to the oldest school building in your area. Stand outside. Look at the structure, not as a school, as a building. Notice the height. Is it taller than it needs to be? Do the ceilings inside match what the exterior suggests? Notice the windows. Are some of them below ground level? Are there sealed openings where windows used to be? Notice the roof. Is there evidence of a dome that was removed? A tower that was shortened? Copper flashing that was replaced with cheaper material? Walk around the building. Look for additions, for seams in the stonework, for walls that were built against older walls. Go inside if you can. Find the basement. Look for doors that lead nowhere, staircases that end at walls, rooms that appear on no floor plan. Look at the ventilation. Are there sealed vents, shafts that have been blocked, ducts that seem oversized for their purpose? Listen. Old buildings have a sound, a resonance, a quality of silence that is different from modern construction. Does this building hum? Does it breathe? Or has it been silenced? This is not about proving a theory. It is about seeing clearly, about recognizing that buildings are not neutral, that architecture shapes behavior, that spaces designed for control produce controlled people, whether or not anyone remembers the original intention. The evidence suggests several possibilities. 1. These buildings were designed with acoustic and architectural features that influenced the nervous system. The features were later removed as part of modernization efforts that did not understand or did not value what was being lost. 2. These buildings were part of a coordinated system, a network of structures designed to function together. The system was dismantled and the evidence destroyed to prevent reconstruction. 3. These buildings were repurposed from earlier structures. Their original function was erased and replaced with a new narrative. The contradictions in the historical record are traces of this erasure. These possibilities are not mutually exclusive. All three may be true. But one thing requires no speculation. The school system we inherited was designed to produce obedience. The architecture reinforced it. The schedules enforced it. The bells trained the nervous system to respond without thinking. Whatever else these buildings were, they were instruments of control. And control has consequences. Look at the world we live in. People who follow orders without questioning. People who sit in rows and wait for permission. People who have been trained from the age of 5 or 6 to suppress their instincts, ignore their bodies, and defer to authority. This is not an accident. This is the product of a system that began in those buildings, a system that shaped generations, a system that continues, even now, even in buildings with dropped ceilings and fluorescent lights, to teach the same first lesson: obey. The past did not vanish. Parts of it were renamed, rebuilt, buried beneath concrete and lost in convenient fires. But the walls remember, the stones remember, and now perhaps you will remember too. The next time you pass an old school, look closer. Not at what it claims to be, at what it was built to do.